Alright, I think this means I am live. Uh, hey, my name's Jose Ramirez. Uh, that's my first attempt at glitch art. That says frogbear.zil. That is a crypto domain. There's no website attached to it yet. Unstoppable Domains. Check it out. I'm not shilling for them because I have no promo code. You can catch me at the podcast with the Rabbit Hole Network at rabbithole.show. Right, you type that into a URL. Um, yeah, you can call me Rami. Today, or at least, right, it's rather late. This is just going to be a journal entry. It's me reading from what I explicitly wrote in my journal on the previous video that I had made of people are people. Where it's can't remember what video it was, but I think it was like 3 videos ago. But it was talking about how people have been figured out to a large degree. A sad truth. People, humanity, society, communities, large or small scale, have largely been figured out and mapped to some degree. From decision making, human development, human experience, it's been chalked up to emotional response systems. All has been understood to some degree. So, when it comes down to the ingestion of the red pill, right, something that happens when you ingest the red pill is your body begins to detox itself from pre-established notions. Right, let's go with that, right? Because you're accepting that the reality you knew is not the reality we all knew. So one has to consider the aspects, the limitations, the capabilities of self, others, and the systems we live in. In case, accepting people for people. Knowing that as you may know yourself, but you also have to know that the people you interact with, mom, dad, sisters, or whatever, they're just going to be themselves. Um, it is that whole notion of being able to not account for yourself, but understand self. Um, so one of the late symptoms that I came to my thought process was late symptoms of detox is the application of thought process in establishing facts, limitations, and functions of humanity. Now, as that sounds cold and a bit distant, um, when you have to approach it this way because there is a huge portion of like corporate capitalism, executives, marketing firms, research development, et cetera, that don't that have to train themselves and detaching themselves from that sort of thought process. So you have to approach this to some degree as a scientist and understand that facts don't care about your feelings. Haha, funny. But it is that sense of understanding that people are people and they're going to respond in the way that they respond to, especially under certain conditions and sets of stimulus. So, in any of these experiments, you have to set a baseline control. Globally, that doesn't work as a standard. Cultures are different, right? But that gets into under current conditions, that's impossible for setting a global standard, right? Because one has to account for influences, and that's based on cultural regions. That's based on the history of the country, the type of people you're addressing, and it's kind of why the Chinese decided to homogenize their entire country with the Han. But again, that gets into more woo woo. Um, Counting for influence, here in the States at least, isn't a matter of only accounting for a few decades. And rewinding isn't as simple as accounting for a few decades. And nor is it as going as 1920s, nor is it the 1800s, nor is it the Declaration of Independence, not the British Crown, not the British Empire, skip the Hundred-Year War, skip the funny-hatted Ottoman Empire. Like, this goes as far back as the Romans. And once you get as far back as the Romans, it gets very difficult for any one actual definitive timeline to exist because your textbooks will say one thing, the Smithsonian will say another, but the bleeding edge researchers who are on the ground currently right now doing any of the work give you a completely different answer than the other two. So it's kind of up in the air for what timeline I necessarily believe, but um, these. Once I was thinking about this, I kind of got onto a tangent, and I said, all these thoughts arose a question: Who awoke the giant? And it was a trick question, right? Because it's a reference to some Japanese question of we awoken the sleeping giant, which is a reference to America during the World War II Pearl Harbor attacks. But in my trick question, it's Dr. Frankenstein. He created this beast. Um, Personally, I feel like a madman on top of a castle. That's another reference to something that I internally believe with aspects of what happened after World War II. So, curious question, bit off topic, but what classifies the fall of an empire? The demise of the people and the land, or the loss of the right of rulership, command, leadership, whatever trust role was assigned to you as to leading everyone else. So what classifies the fall of an empire? And I ask these questions primarily because, to me, it gets back to it gets aspects of free will, but it would be impossible for any one man or living generation to figuring out the intent or the agenda of the hidden hands. A bit funny to read published books about the real hidden hands, the cults, the groups, the special interest groups. But what allowed these books to exist? Vanity? Pride? Or do they relish in making us, or allowing us, to share slivers of truth? It might be it might be a bit off tangent for me to go from being like, yeah, there's a sad truth, man. People have been figured out and da 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 da, and I go into like who awoke the giant. But it was just that exploration of time of can't rewind just a few decades. You can't rewind just to the 1920s and think that we can reverse engineer the effect that has occurred on people and just chalk it up to like just be happy, just change up your attitude and this and that. And it's like, nah, this is something that will heal through generationally, but begs to ask the question of what will happen to America. And I'm not saying that there's like this dystopian future ahead of us of people have been figured out, this and that, and I'm like, nah. Currently, with the culture, the way the current cultural paradigm is existing right now, there's too much exposure. There's too much woo-woo of exposure. So, it's only a matter of time for something to kind of blow up and really blow the lid off of any real corruption in the sense of how analytics data has been weaponized against people. Once that happens, it's kind of that what's that scientific rule that once you start noticing something, it immediately changes. It just something that occurs naturally. Uh, that was it for this one. I'm going to stop this, start another one, and that's going to be on the art of emotional warfare. That one's much shorter. Again, catch me at the podcast with the Rabbit Hole Network every Friday, Saturday. Rabbit Hole dot show. That'll take you to the YouTube. If you click on any of the videos, you'll find the link tree. You can find the Telegram group, which is probably the easiest way to find me personally. If you need to talk to me, I post a lot of news, and if your will is not strong enough, don't go on there because the news will. I don't know. So I've heard some things about how some people like it, some people don't. I don't know.